The old man stood quietly beside a narrow stone bridge in northeastern France. It was a warm August morning, more than 70 years after the Second World War had ended. Around him, children rode bicycles through peaceful streets, and cars crossed the same bridge without anyone giving it a second thought. A visitor asked him why he returned to this place every year. The old man smiled, looked down the empty road, and answered with a sentence that stopped everyone listening. Most people think this town was saved by soldiers. They are only half right. It was saved because one American general knew exactly when not to force his way forward. He refused to explain any further. Instead, he pointed toward the road disappearing between rows of old buildings and quietly said, "If General George Patton had made a different decision here, this town would have remembered liberation very differently." What happened on that road has become surrounded by stories over the years. Some parts are true. Others have grown into local legend. But the real events behind those stories reveal something unexpected about one of America's most aggressive commanders. By the summer of 1944, General George S. Patton had already become one of the most famous military leaders in the Allied armies. His reputation reached far beyond the battlefield. He believed speed won wars. He believed hesitation gave the enemy another chance to fight. His soldiers often joked that if Patton could drive a tank across the English Channel, he probably would. His Third Army seemed to move faster than anyone believed possible. German commanders repeatedly found themselves trying to defend places that Patton had already passed hours earlier. To many people, Patton looked unstoppable. Yet one of the most interesting moments connected to his campaign in France had nothing to do with tanks firing, artillery exploding, or enemy soldiers attacking. Instead, it involved frightened civilians, local officials trying to protect their communities, and a decision that revealed another side of a commander remembered mainly for bold attacks. To understand why this moment mattered, we must return to the weeks after D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. The fighting during June and July was slow, bloody, and exhausting. Thick hedgerows divided the countryside into thousands of natural defensive positions. Every field became another battlefield. American, British, Canadian, and German soldiers fought at incredibly close range. Progress was measured in yards rather than miles. Entire villages changed hands more than once. Civilians hid in cellars while artillery shells crashed above their homes. Liberation had begun, but it came at a terrible price. Everything changed near the end of July. On July 25th, the United States launched Operation Cobra. Massive air attacks shattered parts of the German defensive line near St-El. American infantry and armored units pushed through the opening. Within days, the front that had barely moved for weeks suddenly collapsed. Roads filled with Allied vehicles moving east and south. Engineers repaired bridges almost as quickly as German forces destroyed them. Fuel trucks raced behind tank columns. Reconnaissance units searched every crossroads for signs of retreating enemy formations. It was exactly the kind of fast-moving campaign that suited Patton. On August 1, 1944, the Third Army officially became operational under Patton's command. Almost immediately, its divisions spread across western France. The 4th Armored Division, the 5th Infantry Division, the 80th Infantry Division, and many other formations advanced with astonishing speed. Their objective was simple in theory, but incredibly difficult in practice. They needed to exploit the German collapse before the enemy could reorganize. Every hour mattered. Every road mattered. Every bridge mattered. Imagine standing beside one of those roads during August 1944. Dust hangs in the warm summer air. The distant sound of engines grows louder every minute. Soon the first American reconnaissance jeeps appear. Behind them come armored cars, Sherman tanks, half-tracks carrying infantry, fuel trucks, ambulances, artillery tractors, engineers, mechanics, military police, and supply convoys stretching for miles. The ground vibrates beneath thousands of moving vehicles. Local villagers step outside carefully. Some wave small French flags hidden during the occupation. Others simply watch in silence. They have lived under German control for 4 long years. Freedom is finally arriving, but nobody knows what tomorrow will bring. For French mayors across the country, those days brought impossible choices. Their first responsibility was protecting civilians. Many towns still contained unexploded bombs. Bridges had been prepared for demolition. German rear guards sometimes remained hidden nearby. Refugees crowded narrow streets. Food supplies were dangerously low. Medical care barely existed in some communities. Local officials had survived years of occupation by making difficult decisions every single day. Now another challenge arrived almost overnight. Entire Allied armies wanted to pass through towns that had not yet recovered from years of war. Contrary to popular imagination, liberation did not always look like cheering crowds lining every road. Many French communities welcomed Allied troops with enormous joy, but they also feared what heavy military traffic might bring. A single damaged bridge collapsing beneath tanks could isolate an entire region. A traffic jam lasting several hours could leave civilians trapped between advancing Allied units and retreating German forces. Some mayors worried about hospitals, schools, water systems, and ancient buildings unable to withstand constant military movement. These concerns were real, even while everyone hoped Germany would be defeated as quickly as possible. Patton understood something many people overlooked. Winning a campaign required more than defeating enemy soldiers. It required moving millions of gallons of fuel, thousands of tons of ammunition, food, spare parts, engineers, medics, and communications equipment across hundreds of miles. Roads became weapons. Bridges became strategic objectives. One blocked intersection could delay entire divisions. Military police directed traffic almost continuously. Engineers built temporary crossings whenever permanent bridges failed. Logistics often determined victory before tanks even reached the battlefield. As the Third Army pushed deeper into France during August, its greatest enemy was sometimes not the German army, but simple mathematics. Every advancing mile increased the distance between combat units and their supply depots. Fuel consumption exploded. Trucks wore out. Tires failed. Engines overheated after endless hours on dusty roads. Patton constantly demanded more gasoline because he knew momentum was his greatest advantage. If his column stopped, German commanders would finally have time to regroup. Across eastern France, local stories later emerged describing tense meetings between Allied officers and municipal leaders. Some involved damaged bridges. Others concerned refugee columns blocking roads. A few described worried mayors asking American commanders to avoid narrow historic streets that could not safely carry heavy armor. Historians have documented many such negotiations during the liberation, even if individual details differ from one town to another. Over time, several of these memories blended together into the popular legend that a French mayor once refused to let Patton's army pass. Whether that exact confrontation happened as later stories claimed is impossible to prove, but the legend survived because it reflected a very real tension. Patton demanded speed. Local leaders demanded protection for their communities. Both believed they were serving the same cause. Both feared the consequences of making the wrong decision. That conflict between military necessity and civilian responsibility was repeated across France during the final months of German occupation. Patton's personality made these situations especially interesting. Newspapers often portrayed him as a commander who solved every problem by moving faster. His polished helmet, ivory-handled pistols, and fearless speeches became famous. Yet officers who served closely with him remembered another important habit. Before launching major movements, Patton insisted on detailed reconnaissance. He wanted maps, bridge reports, engineer assessments, weather information, and intelligence from local civilians whenever possible. Speed without information could become disaster. He knew reckless movement was not the same as decisive movement. That difference would soon matter more than anyone expected. Somewhere ahead, another French town waited. Its streets were narrow. Its residents were exhausted after years of occupation. Local officials faced difficult decisions with almost no reliable information. American armored columns approached hour by hour. German forces were still somewhere beyond the horizon. Nobody inside the town knew exactly how close they were. Nobody knew whether the Americans would simply pass through or whether fighting would suddenly erupt in the streets. The old man standing beside the bridge had remembered one final detail before ending his story. He looked at the visitor and quietly added, "Everyone thinks history only changes when someone gives an order to attack. Sometimes history changes because someone decides to wait just long enough to understand what stands in front of him." Then he fell silent. The visitor looked once more toward the quiet road and wondered the same question that still echoes through local memories today. When Patton's army finally reached that town, what decision did the famous general make? And why do people still remember it generations later?